Now, when it comes to topics like this, it's very hard to give proof and evidence. Usually, it's all theories and opinions. However, I feel as though this time we can make an argument and actually back it up with facts and observations. What if the Mandela effect isn't just a psychological trick? What if it has actual proof that our universe is colliding with a parallel universe where things are slightly different? Our world would never be the same again. People would either become extremely religious or an atheist. We'd have riots, wars, so many problems. It would tear our world apart. But first, let's explain what the Mandela effect is. The Mandela effect is when a large group of people all share the same false memory. It was named after Nelson Mandela. Most people remember him dying in prison in 1986. He actually died in 2013. A lot of people also remember the Berenstain Bears as the Berenstain Bears. This is a pretty common example. There's also the Man in the Iron Mask. Many people remember there being a story about a mysterious man who was imprisoned and wore an iron mask. In reality, there is no such story. And then there's Darth Plagueis. In Star Wars Episode 3, it says that Darth Plagueis was a Sith Lord who was killed by his apprentice, Darth Sidious. However, some people remember this line being said in Episode 1 with the character Qui-Gon Jinn instead. All these examples are the Mandela effect. Now, if you don't believe me, I could give you hundreds more examples. But here's the thing. Most scientists and researchers agree that the Mandela effect is not real. They say that it's a psychological trick, false memory, confabulation, or a collective delusion. Basically, they just say, we're all making things up or misremembering things. But what if there's something else going on here? In a recent study, some scientists suggest that the Mandela effect may be caused by quantum entanglement. You see, everything in the universe is made of particles, and those particles are entangled with each other. Entanglement means that two particles are linked together, even if they're light years away from each other. If something happens to one, the other will also be affected. Now, when we observe something, we collapse the wave function and the particles become localized. Basically, they become real. However, before they're observed, they exist in multiple states at once. It's called a superposition. So the scientists think that when we remember something, the particles pop into existence, and we observe them, which collapses the wave function and makes the memory a part of our reality. However, sometimes the particles can still be entangled even after they're observed. This means that the memory won't be localized and will exist in multiple realities at once. This is why some people remember things differently. They're seeing the memories from different realities. However, there's another theory. Some people think that the Mandela effect happens because of timeline shifts. Now, we know that time travel is theoretically possible, but it's impossible with the current technology that we have. However, some people think that the timelines are shifting naturally. As the universe evolves, the timelines also evolve, creating branching timelines where things are slightly different. So when we experience the Mandela effect, it's because we're seeing memories from these different times. Finally, we have the CERN theory. So you know how I said that particles can become entangled even after being observed? Well, some people think that the Large Hadron Collider at CERN is causing this to happen. You see, the LHC accelerates protons to almost the speed of light and then smashes them together. This creates a lot of energy and new particles, which can interact with the particles in our brains and cause them to become entangled. Now, obviously, we can't prove any of these theories right now, but there's one thing that we can't ignore. All of these theories were just guesses and assumptions, but I found a piece of evidence that fits perfectly with the Mandela effect. Have you ever heard of the observer effect? It was discovered in 1927 and basically says that when we observe quantum particles, we change their behavior. For example, if we observe a particle, it will collapse from a superposition into a definite state. This means that the observer plays an active role in creating reality. So, what does this mean for the Mandela effect? Well, some people think that the Mandela effect is actually proof that the observer effect exists. If we remember something, it becomes real. But what if someone doesn't remember that thing? Well, it turns out that memory is relative. It depends on the observer. And if someone doesn't remember something, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that it didn't happen in their reality. So what does this all mean? Well, here are my thoughts. I think that the Mandela effect is real, but I don't think it has anything to do with science or the observer effect. I think it has to do with our memories. Our memories are not perfect. They're actually quite fragile. When we remember something, we're actually reconstructing the memory, not recalling it. This means that our memories can be changed or altered. This is why sometimes when you're telling a story, you might forget a detail, and then someone else might fill in the blank. Your brain automatically accepts the new information and then incorporates it into the memory. This is called the misinformation effect. It's kind of like the Mandela effect, except it happens on a smaller scale. Now, this doesn't explain why so many people share the same false memory, but I think it's because of the way our brains work. You see, Our brains are constantly bombarded with information. We receive visual, auditory, and kinesthetic input every day. Our brains have to process all this information and then store it away. Sometimes the brain can't process the information correctly and stores it away as something else. This is called mnemonics are basically mental shortcuts that our brains use to remember things. However, mnemonics can also be influenced by our emotions. If we're feeling sad or depressed, our brains might store away negative memories. And if we're feeling happy, our brains might store away positive memories. This is called the effect heuristic. So what does this all mean? Well, I think that the Mandela effect is caused by a combination of needs. Our brains are always trying to find the easiest way to remember things, and sometimes that means remembering things incorrectly. And if we share those memories with other people, they might start believing them as well. This is why I think the Mandela effect is actually proof that our brains are not always reliable. We can't just trust what we remember. We have to question it and try to find the truth. Okay, now for the conspiracy. What if the Mandela effect is actually proof that our reality is shifting? Now, I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. What if the Mandela effect is actually proof that our reality is colliding with a parallel universe? In this parallel universe, things are slightly different. Logos are different, movies are different, and even history is different. Now, this doesn't mean that we're living in a simulation, but it does mean that there's something out there that's controlling our timeline. This is where things get really interesting. What if this entity is manipulating our timeline for its own purposes? Maybe it wants us to believe certain things, or maybe it's trying to hide something from us. This is why I think it's important to question everything. We can't just take things at face value. We have to dig deeper and try to find the truth. Now, I know this can all sound confusing, but let me try to simplify it for you. Reality is not what we perceive it to be. There's more to this world than meets the eye. And if we want to understand it, we have to open our minds and be willing to accept new ideas. All right, everyone, it's time to put your tinfoil hats on because the truth is out there. And don't forget, stay curious, my friends.